Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Last year, I started working for Valley View Towing. Besides automotive painting, which was destroying my lungs with all those toxic fumes, towing was my only real skill. The money seemed good at first, but there was a catch. We had to share trucks, and Mike, the owner, was obsessive about controlling where we parked to wait for calls. "Listen up," he'd bark during our morning meetings. "You park exactly where I tell you, when I tell you. That's how we maximize our profits." 3 months into the job, while sitting in my assigned spot at the Walmart parking lot, I noticed my earnings weren't adding up to what they should be. The summer heat was brutal, and I couldn't even run the AC without Mike calling to complain. He'd installed these fancy GPS trackers in all the trucks that monitored everything: engine idle time, location, speed, you name it. "Thompson," he'd yell through the phone, "why's that engine running? You burning my fuel for your comfort?" During one particularly slow afternoon in June, I started researching labor laws on my phone. What I discovered was interesting. If an employer requires workers to stay in specific locations, it's classified as engaged to wait, and we were legally entitled to hourly wages on top of commission. However, if we were free to roam while waiting for calls, that's waiting to be engaged. And commission-only pay was legal. I kept this information to myself, but started documenting my hours meticulously. Around August, Mike began nitpicking everything I did. "What's this?" he screamed one morning, holding up an empty soda can. "You think my trucks are your personal trash bin?" "It's just a can, Mike," I replied calmly. "I was gonna throw it out." "This is completely unacceptable," he continued ranting. By then, I'd already secured a position with another company and decided it was time to execute my plan. I called Mike's office. "We need to discuss my final paycheck," I said. "When can we meet?" During our meeting, I calmly explained the labor laws and my wage expectations. Mike's face turned red. "Absolutely not. You agreed to commission only when you started. That's how it works here." "Actually, Mike, that's not how the law works," I responded. "Get out," he shouted. "You'll get your last commission check and nothing else." I left without arguing, but the following Monday, I contacted the state labor board. The investigator, Mrs. Chen, was particularly interested in my case. "This is a clear violation," she said. "We'll look into it immediately." The investigation revealed similar violations affecting all drivers. The back pay owed was astronomical. Mike had to sell everything: his trucks, his prized speedboat, even the lot. Valley View Towing closed its doors by Christmas. I only received about a quarter of what I was owed, but watching karma catch up to Mike was worth every penny I didn't get. Sometimes, knowledge truly is power, especially when it comes to knowing your rights. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these stories, but here we are. This all started about 6 months ago when my neighbor Randy decided he was going to try pulling one of the dumbest scams I've ever encountered. Some background. I own 5 acres of wooded land that's been in my family for generations. My grandfather bought it in the 1950s, built the house I currently live in, and passed it down to my father, who then passed it to me when he retired to Florida 3 years ago. The property has been properly surveyed, all taxes are paid, and everything is properly recorded with the county. I have all the documentation safely stored away. Randy moved in next door about 2 years ago. At first he seemed okay, just your typical middle-aged guy who kept to himself. That changed when developers started buying up land in our area to build new housing developments. Suddenly, parcels of land that had been worth maybe $100,000 were selling for $500,000 or more. One Saturday morning in April, I was doing yard work when Randy came over, looking way too pleased with himself. "Morning, neighbor," he called out with this weird smirk. "Just wanted to let you know I closed the deal on selling your back acreage to Westbrook Developments yesterday. They're planning to start clearing the land next month." I stopped what I was doing and stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Yeah, I got $450,000 for it. Pretty good deal, right?" He was practically bouncing on his feet. "Randy, what are you talking about? That's my land. I haven't sold anything to anyone." He waved his hand dismissively. No, that parcel belongs to me. Always has. I have the paperwork to prove it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Randy, I have the deed, surveys, and tax records going back 70 years showing that land belongs to my family. You can't just decide it's yours and sell it." "Well, we'll see about that," he said with this infuriating smugness. "The sale's already done. Maybe you should check your own paperwork." He walked away before I could respond. I immediately went inside and pulled out all my property documentation. Everything was exactly as I knew it to be. The entire 5 acres was mine, properly recorded and up to date. I called my lawyer first thing Monday morning and explained the situation. She was as baffled as I was, but assured me we'd get it sorted out. She did some checking and discovered Randy had indeed been trying to sell my land to Westbrook Developments. He'd somehow created fake documents claiming ownership of 3 of my 5 acres. My lawyer immediately sent cease and desist letters to both Randy and Westbrook Developments, including copies of my valid deed and property records. Westbrook's legal team responded within days, extremely concerned about the situation. They provided copies of everything Randy had given them, crude forgeries that wouldn't fool anyone who actually knew what real property documents looked like. But Randy wasn't backing down. He started telling everyone in the neighborhood that I was trying to steal his land. He put up no trespassing signs along what he claimed was his property line, which cut right through my backyard. He even had the nerve to call the police one day when I was mowing my lawn, claiming I was trespassing. The officers who responded were not amused when I showed them my documentation. They told Randy to stop making false reports, or he'd face consequences. Things escalated when Randy hired some cut-rate lawyer who started sending threatening letters about adverse possession and easement rights. My lawyer said his legal arguments were complete nonsense, but we still had to deal with them. "This is actually good news," she told me. "He's creating a paper trail of his attempted fraud. Keep documenting everything." I installed security cameras covering my entire property after catching Randy walking around my backyard taking pictures one day. When confronted, he claimed he was documenting the condition of his property. "Randy," I said, trying to stay calm, "you know this isn't your land. You've lived here 2 years. I have documentation going back to the 1950s. Why are you doing this?" He just smiled that smug smile. "We'll let the courts sort it out. Hope you can afford good lawyers." What he didn't know was that I'd already filed a civil suit against him for attempted fraud and defamation. My lawyer had also reported his actions to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. The real fun started when Westbrook Development's lawyers got involved. They were not happy about potentially being dragged into Randy's scheme. They provided copies of all their communications with Randy, including emails where he'd made various claims about the property's ownership that were provably false. Randy had also cashed their $10,000 earnest money check, money he had no right to accept since he didn't own the property. That's when things got really interesting from a legal standpoint. "He's committed wire fraud," my lawyer explained. "By accepting payment for land he doesn't own, he's crossed the line into criminal territory. The FBI might get involved. I'll admit I got a little satisfaction from watching Randy's smugness fade as reality started catching up with him. His discount lawyer dropped him after receiving our evidence package. The police started taking a serious interest in his activities. Westbrook Developments filed their own lawsuit against him for fraud. But the best moment came when we discovered why he'd tried this ridiculous scheme in the first place. Randy was deeply in debt and facing foreclosure on his own property. He'd apparently convinced himself that if he could pull off this land sale, he could solve all his problems before anyone noticed. "That's not how property law works," my lawyer said, shaking her head. "You can't just declare ownership of someone else's land and sell it." The fact that he thought this would work shows how delusional he was. The civil case moved surprisingly quickly once Randy lost his lawyer. The judge took one look at my documentation versus Randy's crude forgeries and immediately granted summary judgment in my favor. Randy was ordered to remove all his signs, cease all claims to my property, and pay my legal fees. But that wasn't the end of his problems. The district attorney's office had been building a criminal case based on the wire fraud and forgery evidence. They arrested Randy one morning while I was having coffee on my front porch. I'll never forget watching him being led away in handcuffs, still protesting that the land was rightfully his. The criminal case against Randy revealed even more shocking details. It turned out he'd tried similar schemes in 2 other counties, attempting to sell property he didn't own to unsuspecting developers. He'd just never been this bold about it before, usually disappearing when people started asking questions. The FBI did indeed get involved, as this pattern of fraud across multiple jurisdictions made it a federal case. They found Randy had a whole collection of forged property documents on his computer, along with templates and tutorials he'd downloaded from some shady online forums. During this time, Randy's wife Sarah showed up at my door one evening, clearly embarrassed. "I'm so sorry about all this," she said, looking exhausted. "I had no idea what Randy was doing. I knew we were having money problems, but he kept saying he had a business deal that would fix everything. I felt bad for her. How are you holding up?" "I'm filing for divorce," she said quietly. "This isn't the first time he's done something like this. He's always looking for get-rich-quick schemes, but this is the first time he's done something this illegal." The criminal trial was surprisingly quick. With all the evidence against him, Randy took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for wire fraud and forgery, plus ordered to pay restitution to Westbrook Developments for the earnest money he'd taken. My civil judgment against him for legal fees would probably never get paid. Randy was completely broke by this point, but I was more concerned about protecting my property than getting money from him. The whole neighborhood watched as Randy's house was sold in foreclosure. Sarah had already moved in with her sister in another state. The new owners are a lovely young couple who were horrified when they heard about Randy's schemes. "Don't worry," the husband assured me. "We actually bought this house legally. We have all the proper documentation." We had a good laugh about that. I did make one major change after all this. I had a new survey done and installed very permanent property markers along all my boundaries. They're big concrete posts with metal caps, GPS marked and registered with the county. I also put up some discreet but high-quality security cameras, not taking any chances with future neighbors. The developers who almost got scammed, Westbrook Developments, actually approached me legitimately about buying part of my land. I politely declined. "This property's been in my family for 3 generations, I told them. "I plan to keep it that way." They were very understanding and even shared some interesting stories about other property scams they'd encountered over the years, though none quite as brazen as Randy's attempt. Looking back, I'm still amazed at the sheer audacity of what Randy tried to pull. My lawyer says she's going to use this case as an example in her property law presentations, because it hits so many different legal issues. "The beautiful thing," she told me, "is that the property record system, while sometimes slow and bureaucratic, worked exactly as it's supposed to. All your documentation protected you perfectly." I later learned that Randy's cellmate is another guy who tried to sell property he didn't own, though that guy at least had the sense to pick vacant land where the owners lived out of state. They apparently spend their time complaining about how the system brought them down. The FBI agent who worked the case stopped by after the trial to get some additional documentation and told me something interesting. "You know what the dumbest part of his scheme was?" the agent said. "Even if he had managed to fake the documentation well enough to fool the initial sale, it would have fallen apart as soon as Westbrook tried to record the deed. The county records would have shown the overlap immediately. He was never going to get away with it. These days, things are quiet again. My property is secure, Randy's enjoying federal hospitality, and my new neighbors are fantastic. The only lasting impact is that I've become somewhat of an expert on property law and documentation. I've even helped a few other people in the area verify their property records just to be safe. Oh, and one final bit of karma. Remember those property markers I had installed? The surveyor found that Randy's house actually encroached about 6 inches onto my property at one corner. The new owners and I had a good laugh about that and quickly signed an easement agreement to handle it properly. You know, the legal way to deal with property issues. I sometimes wonder if Randy, sitting in his prison cell, realizes just how badly his brilliant scheme backfired. Not only did he lose everything he had, but he's now the cautionary tale that local real estate lawyers tell their clients about why you shouldn't mess with property records. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson. Keep your property documentation in order, know your rights, and never underestimate the audacity of a desperate person with access to a computer and a printer. Also, security cameras are worth every penny. I still have that smug smile Randy gave me when he first announced he'd sold my land burned into my memory, but now it just makes me laugh. Because at the end of the day, I'm still here on my family's land, and he's explaining to his cellmate how he would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling property records. Update. 6 months later. The aftermath of my land-grabbing neighbor's scheme. A lot has happened since my last post, and I thought you all might be interested in how things turned out. Turns out, Randy's attempted land grab was just the tip of the iceberg. About 2 months ago, I received a call from the FBI agent who handled Randy's case. They'd been investigating his previous schemes and found something that directly affected me. "We found evidence that Randy actually damaged your property before attempting to sell it," the agent explained. "He deliberately killed several old-growth trees along the property line to make the land more appealing to developers. This explains something that had bothered me, why several beautiful oak trees had suddenly died last spring. The FBI found receipts for herbicide on Randy's computer, along with emails where he discussed the best way to kill trees without making it obvious. My lawyer immediately filed an additional civil suit. While Randy was already in prison and broke, she explained that we could potentially go after his remaining assets, including his pension from his former employer. Tree law is no joke, she told me. The replacement value of mature trees can be enormous. Each of those oaks could be worth $25,000 to $50,000 in damages. I also got an unexpected call from Sarah, Randy's ex-wife. She'd found additional documentation while clearing out their storage unit. I found a notebook where Randy detailed his whole plan, she said. He'd been plotting this for over a year. He even had backup forged documents in case the first ones didn't work. She turned everything over to the FBI and my lawyer. This new evidence led to additional charges against Randy, extending his prison sentence by another 2 years. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember those developers, Westbrook? They reached out to me again, but not to try buying my land. We're developing a case study on real estate fraud, their legal director explained. We'd like to use your situation as an example of how to properly verify property ownership and handle fraud attempts. Would you be willing to speak at our annual conference? I agreed, and it turned out to be a fascinating experience. I learned that real estate fraud is way more common than most people realize. My case has actually helped several other companies improve their verification procedures. The conference appearance led to something unexpected. A local real estate attorney who attended asked me to join his firm's community education program. Now I give monthly presentations to first-time homebuyers about property rights and documentation. It's surprisingly rewarding to help people understand how to protect themselves. As for my property, those trees Randy killed weren't the end of the story. An arborist examined the area and found that the herbicide had spread further than we initially thought, affecting several more trees. The total damage assessment came to just over $275,000. While Randy couldn't pay it, the court allowed us to place liens on his pension and the small inheritance he was set to receive from his parents. He'll be paying me back for a very long time. The new neighbors who bought Randy's house have been fantastic. They actually helped me start a neighborhood watch program focused on property crime. We've installed shared security cameras at street corners and hold regular meetings to keep everyone informed about local issues. I used part of the first pension payment we collected from Randy to plant new trees along the property line. The arborist helped me choose species that will grow quickly but live long. In 20 years, they'll be even more impressive than the ones Randy killed. Sarah stopped by recently with some more surprising news. Randy's trying to write a book about his unfair persecution from prison, she said, rolling her eyes. He still thinks he did nothing wrong. My lawyer assured me that any money he makes from the book would go straight to paying his restitution and civil judgments. She also pointed out that publishing his crime story might violate his plea agreement. The FBI has used my case to create a training module for new agents about property fraud. They invited me to review it, and it was surreal seeing my situation used as a teaching tool. They've actually identified several other attempted scams in our state using lessons learned from Randy's case. One particularly satisfying development came when the state legislature took notice. They're now working on a bill to increase penalties for property fraud and provide better resources for victim restitution. They're calling it the Property Rights Protection Act, and I've been asked to testify in support of it. The local newspaper did a follow-up story about the case, focusing on how to prevent similar fraud attempts. The reporter interviewed me, several legal experts, and even the county recorder's office staff. The article led to a surge of people checking their property records and discovering various issues that needed fixing. I've started working with a local land conservation group to place a permanent conservation easement on part of my property. This will ensure that even after I'm gone, no one can develop that land. The irony that Randy's actions led to this permanent protection isn't lost on me. The whole experience has actually made me more connected to my community. I've met so many neighbors I never knew before, and we've created a strong network of people looking out for each other's interests. Last week, I received a letter from Randy's prison. I didn't open it. Instead, I gave it to my lawyer, who read it and added it to our documentation. She said it was just more delusional justifications for his actions, but it's good to keep records of all contact. The best part of this update, my property is now probably the best documented and legally protected piece of land in the county. Between the new survey markers, security cameras, conservation easement, and the pile of legal precedents we've established, nobody will ever try this kind of scheme again. I've installed a small bench near where the new trees are growing. Sometimes I sit there and think about how Randy's greed and dishonesty ultimately led to making this property more secure than ever. The land that's been in my family for generations will stay protected for generations to come. As my lawyer likes to say, sometimes the best revenge is just letting the legal system work exactly as it's supposed to. In this case, it worked perfectly, and I came out stronger and more knowledgeable than ever. The whole experience has taught me that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. Randy thought he could bully and deceive his way into stealing my property, but he only succeeded in destroying himself while making my position stronger. And those monthly checks from his pension, they're going straight into a fund for maintaining the property and supporting the new community watch program. Sometimes justice has a way of coming full circle. The next one is a malicious compliances story. Back in the 90s, I worked at the family engine shop downtown. It was an L-shaped building with a back lot that was separated from the street by a brick wall topped with a wrought iron fence. The only access to it was through the shop. On the other side of the building, we had a 20-spot lot that was completely open. The shop was about 3 small blocks from the local hospital. The hospital decided to remodel and expand, but since they were landlocked at the time, the only place they had to build was their parking garage and lots. So they immediately changed their policy to only emergency room parking on site. They bought or rented several lots around the city and ran a bus, maybe buses, to get everyone to and from the hospital. From what I gathered, the staff lot was the furthest away, and the bus stopped at every lot on its route, adding quite some time to the staff's commute. They got very strict that there was no staff parking for any reason in any lot other than the staff lot. This included visiting doctors or specialists, whatever. It wasn't long before our parking lot started filling, as we were the closest business with an open lot. At first, we simply had any car with a hospital sticker towed. About 2 weeks after that, we would start getting keys in the drop box with notes like, "Makes funny noise when turning right, have ready by 2 p.m. We would take the car around the block for a test drive and write some notes if we noticed anything. Of course, they never wanted to fix whatever that issue was if we actually found something. My uncle quickly got tired of these shenanigans and had a glorious solution: use the back lot to store these new customer vehicles. He would have me move the cars into the back, behind the customer and shop vehicles right next to the fence so the customer could clearly see their vehicles. He then charged for a day's storage and for every car we had to move to get the hospital staff's car in and out. I don't know exactly what he charged, but probably around $100 total for the day. Not only that, but it would take me 40 minutes to an hour to move everything around just to get to one of these vehicles out. Of course, the hospital staff would yell and complain over the price and how long it took me to get their vehicles. My uncle would just smile, and if they didn't want to pay, tell me to move slower, take extra care of this important customer's car, he'd say, while he set up the paperwork to place a mechanic's lane on the vehicle. It didn't take long for the issue to reduce from a full lot to maybe one when we got to the shop in the morning. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.